We have a joke in our family about putting our high heels on if we're... I suppose I'd throw the question back and go, do we need to redefine it? I'm not sure we do.
Thanks. Welcome to How to Take the Lead, the podcast where we challenge the myths and stereotypes of what it means to be a leader today and help you to succeed in post without compromise. I'm Lee Griffith.
And I'm Carrie-Anne Wade, and together we will be your guides, questioning everything we've ever learnt about leadership, sharing our experiences along the way, and inspiring you to make a real impact in your role.
Visit howtotakethelead.com for show notes, past episodes, and to join our community.
Enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Take the Lead. Hello, Lee.
I just jumped in there.
I was going to get really formal then and go for those people who don't. But of course, people listen all the time. They know who we are. And I was about to say, I'm Carrie-Anne and I'm here with the lovely Lee. And I am. So Lee, how are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. Yes.
Good.
Yeah. And energizing week so far. I'm notioning my way through life.
Of course you are. I love it. You've got an app for every occasion to help keep you organised. You try to get me on the app wagons as well, and I do well for a bit, and then knowing my personality type fade away until you G me back up. But yes, Notion is our new favourite app for this podcast series, which is very exciting. If Notion would like to sponsor an episode, please feel free. They happen to be listening. I wanted to say, fabulous blouse you have on there, Lee. Loving it.
Ditto.
Pop of colour for you.
Yours is, I feel like you're really going, you've got the 1920s vibe going.
The little bob and the fringes back.
But also the pattern and the
little scallopy edge.
That's the word I was trying.
And this only makes any sense if you're watching this on YouTube. Of course, if you're listening to us on the podcast, we've done really poorly in our description there of anything that we're wearing. So you can't picture us, but I'm sure you would have spotted us on socials because there'll be some post there about this episode. So you'll get to see what we're wearing, and what a lovely surprise you'll have if you see that after you've listened to the episode. Anyhow, we are not here today to chat fashion, clothes, any of that kind of stuff. We are here to tackle a subject that I feel like we have touched on in different ways, shapes and forms over other episodes of How to Take the Lead, but I'm not sure we've ever really tackled it head on. And we've obviously made some assumptions that people listening to this podcast are listening because they are either leaders already or they are aspiring leaders of the future. Totally distracted now by Lee's amazing looking drink. What is that delight?
I'm totally on the iced coffee, protein coffee bandwagon here.
For a moment I thought you were having some sort of cocktail that I wasn't in on the action with, and I was about to get absolutely massive FOMO. Sorry listeners, totally distracted. Viewers will have obviously seen the delightful drink that Lee's been supping. Where was I at? So we have assumed that people listening to this podcast have some level of desire to be a leader in the future, or they are in some sort of leadership position now. But I'm not sure we've ever really just asked, is leadership for you? So I wanted us to kind of just have a conversation about that in this episode, if that's all right with you, Lee, today.
Yeah.
I think we've talked before about drivers and motivation maybe to lead, and also how to be motivated as a leader. But I guess I just wanted to know a bit more about why people might want to be leaders. And I thought actually maybe that would be a good interview question, and one that I've never actually had myself. But I thought, I'm surprised I've never been asked, why do you want to be a leader here? So I'm going to note that down for any future interviews that I'm doing for myself. And it might be that you are aspiring to be that leader, but it's also a relevant question, I think, if you've been a leader for a while, questioning why you want a leadership position, why you're putting yourself out there in that leadership space. So before we get into the real meat of it, I thought it might be interesting and helpful for listeners to hear a little bit about our own motivations. So I'm going to put you on the spot, not because I am interviewing you for a job, Lee, but I wondered what your motivation was to move into that leadership space, Lee, and whether you could tell us a bit more about that to just get us off and set the context for the conversation.
It's so interesting. So as you were talking, there were lots of different, almost like little sub chats that were going on in my head then, which was this kind of, are you being interviewed to be a leader or being a manager? And is it a hierarchical thing? I mean, there's so many different things going there. Did I want to be a leader? I know I definitely didn't enjoy managing people.
I know, and we've had this chat before, haven't we, about how comfy we feel in that space and whether we found it particularly rewarding or not. And I think we're probably for a change, we're on different spaces with that, because I've quite enjoyed managing people, but you not so much.
No, but leadership is different, and I do think that you can lead and not manage, if you know what I mean. Obviously, people are solo leaders. I think what motivated me to step into that leadership nearly swore then, leadership sphere, is that I think there were a few things. One, I definitely wanted to show the strategic importance of the function, and so be a leader in my professional area within my organisation and beyond my organisation. And maybe we'll touch on this a bit later, because I think sometimes you can be a leader in your field and not necessarily a leader in your organisation, and they're two different things. I wanted to be part of a change and make a difference. Absolutely, that drove me. I didn't necessarily always like what I was seeing at the top, and I think it was the redheadedness in me was that I want to get in there and try and make a difference. And I think that was also what drove me to join the types of organisations that I joined, rather than just doing PR in a sales marketing kind of focused organisation. But I'm going to be realistic and honest. I was very ambitious and I wanted to be a young director. I definitely wanted the money that came with more senior roles. And so it wasn't I wasn't as purist of, I want to be a leader because I want to do great things and let's join hands and sing songs. I wanted some of the perks that came with the hierarchical leadership power, I suppose.
And I don't think we should ever be ashamed to say that, because it feels like we say that sometimes with a bit of like, ooh, and I know we've had conversations before about knowing your worth and pay, particularly in the space where we feel like equal pay or non-equal pay is an issue. But I don't ever think we should shy away from the fact that we are motivated by things other than that altruistic sense of doing good for others. So I know it sometimes feels awkward to say it, doesn't it? But actually being motivated by the desire to earn more money to afford a lifestyle that you want to have, for example, isn't always a bad thing. So so I think kudos and appreciate your honesty in that space. Absolutely.
But I think that's also where the management versus leadership thing comes in, because particularly when we look at hierarchy and all of that, because it was a case of I could go into a more senior management position to be paid more.
Yeah,
I was probably in a leadership space before I was in that senior management space.
Interesting. And it really resonated with me what you said about the strategic importance of function, and obviously having both come from the same professional background, that absolutely has felt really important to me from the point of view of my own kind of leadership journey and where I've wanted to go and why I've wanted to show up in certain spaces, I guess, as a leader, to almost prove the worth of the function, which still I find challenging that we have to do. We still have to do that, but that's definitely been a driver from my point of view in terms of leadership. So that definitely resonated with me. And I think you're right, we probably will go on to talk about some of that kind of space around you can be a leader in your field of expertise without necessarily being a leader in that hierarchical sense, or maybe even being recompensed in the way that other leaders might be in your organisation for sure. I guess for me, from my point of view, there was something about wanting to have an impact for others, and that's something that's definitely been a driver for me, not just in my kind of work career but life in general. Like I honestly get pleasure out of seeing other people achieve and being able to be part of that support team, if it were to kind of like help people to do that. So definitely there was something for me in believing that being in the leadership space would enable me to have more impact for others, to push and stretch other people to achieve their goals, but also to push and stretch myself a bit as well, I think. And I think we've talked about this before, Lee, but I hadn't necessarily seen that many people like me in leadership roles early in my career. And when I say like me, I guess I mean a female leader who didn't feel the need to be more masculine in their behaviour or approach, and somebody who was compassionate and good-humoured and kind and interested in the person as much as, or if not more so, than the process, if that kind of makes sense. So it felt like there were some opportunities for me to be able to challenge that and challenge myself to see if actually I could operate as a leader with my own personality type and kind of behaviours that I have. So I guess there's also been something for me as I've progressed in the leadership space about feeling like I have received support and guidance to support my career, and actually being a leader has given me the opportunity to, I hope, to do the same for others. And I felt a real sense of responsibility around that, I think, in terms of actually passing that on and bringing new people and new talent forward. So they were just my reflections when I was thinking about my motivation to lead. But absolutely agree with, there was a level of motivation of like, I want to be able to get a mortgage and buy a house and have a nice life and have a lovely holiday as well. And actually quite often, as you say, a sort of promotional linear hierarchical route kind of leads to that, which might put you in leadership positions. So yeah, hopefully some of what we've said is resonated with people listening, and I'll be really intrigued to know from listeners about kind of what's motivating them to be in that leadership space, or potentially want to be a leader in the future. So DM us on the socials, get in touch via the email if you want to share some of your stories, because I would be really intrigued to hear that for sure. So it's interesting because my second question, without actually knowing where some of your journey and your experience was going to take us, was around that bit about promotion and that hierarchical kind of approach to leadership. And both of our own stories have got some of that in there, being in more senior positions, like climbing that linear ladder. So I guess the first part of my question is, do we feel that kind of leadership is too focused on that hierarchy and maybe that striving to get to the top? Is that still a thing in the leadership world, do you think, Lee?
I think it is. I think if you look at it from an organisational view, then yes, people see it as from a hierarchical, whether you cut it at a certain pay grade or a certain job title or whatever, there is still a cadre of people in an organisation that they will see as their top leaders, senior leaders, whatever, regardless of whether those individuals see themselves as leaders or not. And I reflect on when I was in my corporate life and we did a leadership development program with people who were of a certain banding and higher. We used to ask that question of, who in the room sees themselves as a leader, to get a gauge. And it was really interesting. Not that many people did, yet probably because of their positional power, the organisation, certainly the board would have seen these people as leaders because they had position and influence and they were setting direction and all of that kind of stuff. But the individuals, the vast majority, didn't see themselves in that role as leader. So I do think it's a really interesting, nuanced organisation versus person perspective.
Absolutely, and we've talked before as well, haven't we, about how comfortable people are as identifying as leaders. So they might be very comfortable to identify by their job title, which potentially might be a very senior one, director of, head of, whatever that job title might be, is easy to say, but it seems more challenging in some respects for people to say, I'm a senior leader in this organisation. And I don't know whether that's about perhaps the perceived level of accountability that comes with being a leader versus being a maybe it's back to that point about leader versus manager, senior manager in your profession. Like maybe that feels less of a big responsibility and burden on your shoulders. I don't know, but I have noticed that people struggle to kind of talk about themselves a lot as leaders, even though they are in what would be perceived to be senior leadership positions. So
unless they think it's implied by their job title.
True.
And so they don't feel, they don't want to do the
because like you say, it's putting your high heels on and like maybe being a bit show offy. But so there's so much in that, isn't there? And it's back to your point about often there's something about person versus position that doesn't necessarily always align, perhaps.
Yeah. I think there's something about, if we look at it from an individual perspective, I think whether you see yourself as a leader or not probably also goes back to what you see as your purpose and the intent of what it is that you're trying to do. So some people just want to do that job because of what they get from the job, whether it's pay, convenience or whatever. Some people go into a job because they want to make change. They've got that talk of that fire in the belly, that they've seen an injustice, they want to make something happen. They want to show up as a specialist in their area and excel in what it is they do. Sometimes it's really complex and it's a mismatch of all of those things. So I think probably that sense of, do I feel like I'm leading others and I'm setting direction and all of that probably comes down to what's my purpose and my intent at the end of the day.
Yeah, and we do discuss that a lot, don't we, about being clear on your purpose as a leader and that being really important. So you've touched on this. Sorry, Lee, you're going to say something.
Well, I was going to say, does it matter?
Well, I'm just about to ask you a question
Sorry.
little bit like that around whether or not it matters. I guess more linked to the conversation we've had about being an expert in your field versus being in a hierarchical position of power in your organisation. So I wanted to explore with you exactly that. Can you be a leader in a different way, and can you be a leader without that kind of linear ladder climb to sort of positions of what we perceive to be authority? So we have talked about being experts in your field, voices that other people respect and listen to. So I guess you've already started to explain some of that. Is that possible? Is it possible to be a leader without having that kind of job title / position of power in your organisation?
Yeah.
I asked such a good question there, didn't I? Yes, it is. Carry on. Thanks, moving us on.
So I think it depends on whether you are wanting to be clear in defining yourself as a leader, or is leadership something that others define you by? And
interesting.
And is it a case of a leader is someone that takes people with them, has vision and all that. So you don't need to necessarily have positional power. We did that power episode where we talked about all the different types of power you might be able to utilise as a leader. And I suppose each of those, if you do utilise them, shows leadership in one way or another. So I think there is, we even know if you are trying to make change happen in your organisation, you go to people who are able to influence, who are able to inspire, who are able to take people with. They won't necessarily be the department heads, they won't necessarily be the most senior directors in that hierarchical sense, but they will be the people who might have the ear of those that are likely to challenge the change, or they might be the ones who just have a great energy about them and will go get them, let's do it kind of attitude, and that's who you want around you. And all of those are leadership qualities. So I don't think this is a clear-cut one.
No, and it is that point, isn't it, whether you are intending in your actions to position yourself in some sort of leadership role, regardless of, as you say, whether or not that's recognised by what your actual job is in the organisation, or whether or not that leadership is almost being thrust upon you because other people see you as a trusted person whose guidance they want to take, whose footsteps they want to follow in, however we want to describe that. And sometimes you might have the perfect mix of both of those, and I guess sometimes it's one or the other. I guess the challenge comes if you are intentionally trying to position yourself as a leader, but actually other people don't see you as one, then actually are you? And I think my answer would be no. Like, it may be by self-defined title, but not by actual action. So that is quite interesting. And in response to the last question, you talked a lot about those personal drivers that you might have to want to be a leader, whether that is, the fire in your belly to make a change, to make difference to people, whether there's a very specific agenda that you want to be known as the expert in because you're interested in that space. And I guess, well, we would all love to be completely altruistic and about the greater good. I was just wondering if you're one of those leaders somewhere who isn't getting the recompense because they're not in a defined leadership role in an organisation. I mean, what is the reward for you in that space as a leader? Why would you be showing up there?
I'm struggling to come with a clear answer because I do think it is, if you aren't doing it because you want it as a pay outcome, let's say, for example, there will always be something. So I'm thinking back when I was in my early stages of my career and I was the most senior person in my area of expertise, as it were, but I wasn't, from a pay perspective, from a hierarchy perspective, I didn't have that. I wouldn't have been seen as a leader. I wouldn't have probably been round the table if they said, "Oh, we're going to take everyone and put them in one of these development programs," for example. But I had influence, and I was able to demonstrate my expertise because I was the only one with that knowledge and understanding, and got in front of the people that it mattered. So for me, I was able to demonstrate leadership in my area. I was able to influence what some of the senior leaders were doing, even though I wasn't a senior leader myself. That was the outcome I was seeking. I wanted that strategic impact. I wanted them to take my area seriously.
And I think that's a really interesting point to cover. And I guess as a slight aside, I have actually had a couple of recent conversations and talking about, as we did at the start, trying to prove the strategic importance of our own function, where I have had conversations with people who say exactly your point. I was the most senior communicator in my organisation, or I am that. But I'm nowhere near as senior as the people that I'm expected to work with on a very regular basis, and kind of feeling that difference in positional power, I guess, when they're showing up for meetings and they're in spaces where they're working with those people, and kind of questioning themselves, like, why would people listen to me because they're all directors or heads of and I'm just which I hate that kind of I'm just this term, but that's for another conversation. And so I guess it is just quite interesting, isn't it, about how you then do exactly as you've said you've done, which is just show up with intent to be strategic and prove your level of expertise and add that value into the space, recognizing but not getting too hung up on the fact that your physical position in terms of your job isn't as senior as the people that you're working with. And I guess for some people there then might be an argument to prove that actually you are operating at that level and maybe you should be rewarded as such, but that's not always where we find ourselves, sadly.
No, but and I also recognised that I needed to broaden my influence and my areas of responsibility if I wanted to be seen as an equal and to move up that hierarchical ladder. So there was a recognition that I wasn't going to have rewards, as we talk about. There wasn't that route up there for me if I stayed in my single specialist area. I had to broaden that out, and that, I believe, was a benefit to the organisation and to me personally. That's why I can get a bit, when people get hung up on we need this title at this level, because that isn't what we're striving for.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's really, really helpful, I think, and leads a little bit on to the next question for me. When you are in a predefined leadership position, there are deliverables that you will be expected to kind of work on around accountability and performance. But again, that's very much about being in a sort of gifted leadership position in an organisation that has a job title. And we've talked about leaders not always needing to be in those senior positions in an organisation to actually be seen as a leader or operate as a leader. So do we need to define what we mean by leadership? Because clearly no one size fits all. Or, how do we start to have those conversations to make leadership less about being the person at the top of the organisation all the time?
I'm not sure we need to redefine what leadership is. I think the lens of which we talk about hierarchy and leadership is just one element of it. But I think when people describe what leadership is to them, that's when you see the variety. And very rarely when people describe what leadership means to them, do they actually reference hierarchy? So I think it's something that we perhaps impose in our view of, particularly again, this organisational versus person view. But I think when you boil it down to what do the person on the street or the person in your organisation, when you say who's a leader, what does good leadership look like? They'll give you values and qualities and attributes. They don't say, oh, it's the
chief executive or the whatever.
Yeah. So I'm not sure we do need to redefine it. For me, I think I like to talk about this impactful leadership. So yes, you might be a leader in your title or the type of power you have, but if you're not having the right impact, then you're perhaps not seen as a leader in my eyes. So I think that's the key. Whether you've got the vision and you can take people with you, whether you build trust, whether you live your values and act with integrity, whether you communicate well and engage and all of those kind of things, those are the leadership qualities that people will reference when they talk about what good leadership looks like.
And so I guess I bring it back to that point and maybe rephrase the question that was the theme of this episode. So we asked, is leadership for you? And we've kind of talked about it doesn't have to be about the position you have in the organisation. But I guess then what's in it for you to be a leader? If it isn't about that positional power, and obviously you and I are very much about the fact that there are all those other aspects to being a leader, what's in it for you as a person to want to step into that leadership space? Like, what are you going to gain from positioning yourself as a leader, I guess?
I'm hesitating because do leaders think in a way that is what's to gain from this? And I'm not sure. I'm sure if people, if we look at it through the lens of I want to be a senior manager and I want hierarchy and power, I think they probably do look more at what's the reward and gain for doing this. But I'm not sure whether people who go, I want to be a leader, are thinking, I think their thing is, this is an outcome that I'm seeking to achieve. This is a difference I want to make. And those are the things that I tend to hear. I want to make things, I want to kind of help communicators thrive. That's the impact and outcome that you're seeking in the leadership that you offer, for example.
So I guess
Does that make sense?
I guess maybe gain is not the right word then. I guess it's what's the personal reward for you, because being a leader is hard. It's hard work often being in that space. So what's the reward? And I guess what we're saying is the reward of putting yourself out there and developing and growing yourself and positioning yourself as a leader is to have that impact that you want to have, deliver on that purpose that's really driving you in terms of, you've said it, that fire in your belly, delivering a change, being impactful, moving something forward towards a more positive solution, whatever that might be. That's the thing that drives you to want to be a leader, rather than anything else around whether you've got the right job title, what your pay grade might be, how other people potentially are perceiving you or not. That actually what your personal reward is for wanting to be a leader, if you're considering that, is that you are having an impact or making a change in the space that's most important to you. Does that feel like a good kind of way to describe it?
Yeah, and I think it's okay not to want to be a leader as well. I think if you're in that positional power of authority where others expect you to be a leader, then you do need to do some work to figure out how people around you are going to get what they need. So that vision, direction, blah, blah, blah. But I think otherwise, if more generally, if you haven't got that passion or you haven't got that drive to want to make change, you don't need to worry about, am I a leader or not? Because I do think it's more about what other people see you as than what you title yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've talked a little bit about this, and it was just slightly off-piste, but I thought an interesting part of this conversation. But you've talked about, like, if you are a leader, or you maybe even have that built-in desire and drive to lead and be a leader, what happens when you do reach like the most senior leadership position you might be able to find yourself in? Is that the point at which your leadership growth stops, or is there more to be achieved? So we've said it's not necessarily about being the CEO or being a director of X, but actually if that is part of your career trajectory and your drive and ambition forward to grow and develop as a leader, when you get there, then like, what happens?
I don't think it's a question of whether you stay being a leader or not. I think probably the types of questions is, do I stay in this post or not? Do I go on to do something else somewhere else, or does my leadership change? I think each organisation has its own challenge, and so even if you have made it to the top of an organisation, you can go to somewhere else and it will feel completely different. Or if you don't want to get to the top but you want to be a leader in your field, then it might be there's a particular element of an area of work that you're really interested in, you want to take forward in some way, and so that you that's where you put your interest and your energy into that. So I think there's ways that you've got to find what's going to float your boat and keep you motivated. And it goes back to that episode that we did around motivation. How do you stay motivated? And so I don't think it's a case of, do I step away from being a leader? I think it's about, do I stay where I am, or do I need to find a different challenge in a different guise?
And I think it's about, for me, that kind of question or questions about, how much of this is about your own growth as a leader, and that might be then about, okay, I need to step away and do this for another cause or in another organisation, and how much of it might actually be about, okay, I've reached this space here now, but actually is this organisation on a growth trajectory? Does this organisation need to change or shift focus in some way? And I guess it's about understanding the two of those to kind of know where you might be the best fit in terms of really being able to have that impact that you always talk about as a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the word one size doesn't fit all. You didn't actually mention it in that way, but
but that's what we were getting at. We were getting at, like, one size doesn't fit all. It's not a one size fits all kind of approach to things.
And so I think that's part of it. You understanding who you are as a leader and what you offer and what you bring will determine where you go next, because you're not going to be all things for all seasons.
Lovely. I like that. I love the little frown you did. That does make sense, by the way, in case you were wondering if you'd thrown a Leism into the mix at that point.
I did,
so,
yeah.
So if our sort of conversation and debate hasn't put people off wanting to be in that leadership space, and we're assuming that people might be asking the question of themselves about whether leadership's for them, I guess it feels like we've got to that time in the conversation where we might want to give some practical advice or tips to people. So, and it doesn't have to be one, I've said one, but it might be more than one, Lee. But what one action do you think that people could take away from having listened to this conversation to consider in terms of whether they want to step into or stay in that leadership space and determine whether leadership is for them or not?
I think it's focus less on the word leadership and focus more on your why. Go back to what is it you're trying to achieve and why are you trying to achieve it. And I think having a clarity in that answer will determine where you go and in your career and whether that's leadership or not.
I love that. It's really similar to what I thought about, which was about, so you've said why, it was about purpose. So what's your purpose and your motivation? And that will help determine whether being in that leadership space is the right way to deliver on that purpose and motivation or not. And it might not be, and that's absolutely okay too. So
yeah,
how we're completely aligned with, there was definitely one action people could take away from this episode. So the how-to is to go away and think about that question if you're considering whether leadership is for you or not, and to be absolutely okay with the fact that it might not be, because it's not for everyone, is it? So interesting. Thank you so much for your insight and challenge in this episode in terms of getting us to think a bit differently about that more personalised individual question about whether leadership's for you or not. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you. It's lovely talking to you.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to hit follow to make sure you get the next episode. And if today's discussion resonated, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts.
We also have our Substack community where you can get behind the scenes info, ask us anything sessions, and build your network with like-minded leaders. Visit howtotake.substack.com to find out more.
And if you want to work with us to challenge and change leadership in your organisation, get in touch by dropping us an email, howtotake.thelead@gmail.com, or DM us on the socials. Until next week,
get out there and take the lead.